you know, we're presuming everybody understands what's happening in island hopping and supply chain attacks, basically what happened with SolarWinds and Kyocera. But maybe Tom, you could share like the short version of how these attacks are transpiring, and when you guys are talking about these guys lying in wait and soaking within the network, you know, what does that really mean from a practical standpoint? And I will say I threw in the CyberArk diagram because I think they get credit for discovering the Golden SAML hack, right? But with that being said, so maybe you could comment, Tom, on, you know, your top level view of SolarWinds and how it's actually happening, and go from there.
Well, let's just address, you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is frankly, if they'd done a better job of hardening systems and access control and gone to two-factor authentication at all and done a better job of segmentation, they wouldn't have suffered this breach. However, once the adversary got in, they began to deploy some very interesting payloads. One of my favorite ones was Cosmic Gale, favorite in the sense that it was so nefarious. This thing automated the deletion of logs. It manipulated time specific to the sessions where the adversary was on a specific host. And then it deposited a secondary command and control on the sleep cycle through image files, through steganography, which, woof, that's a lot. And that's rough. And which really highlights the fact that you don't want them ever getting in. And when they get in, they're going to make sure that they stay in forever. Yeah. So it goes back to the whole home invasion construct. And so you have to do a better job of hardening up front, and a better job of, you know, authentication best practices, which you guys do incredibly well. And then obviously visibility. You can't just have your cameras, your Ring camera metaphorically focused on your front lawn and your driveway. You got to have cameras in the home. Sorry to say that, but metaphorically, you need cameras in the home that synchronize with the attack dog and the bodyguard. And if you don't have those things, you're in deep trouble, particularly when you're, as a significant player like this, providing services and functionality to a multitude of important entities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for those who are curious about, wow, is this gonna happen again? Maybe you guys could characterize this for me. Was the SolarWinds attack years in the making, and will the next, you know, hopefully there won't be a next one, but will the next attack also be years in the making? Or are the attackers able to take the code and the processes they've built up and sort of do more of a rinse and repeat or cut and paste? Like, how long is the cycle for these typically to make these major attacks come about? Fred, is that something you've seen in your purview, or could even comment in? I know that's a hard question, but people want to know, like, okay, is this a one and done, or what is this?
Well, the thematics of the problem, I think, are going to be persistent. I think the rate of development is going to increase. You have to consider that anyone writing malicious software or attempting to compromise the supply chain has, you know, time, has resources, and has technical capability or competence. The challenge we have is, you know, in a lot of cases, that's a software development lifecycle that actually works faster than the software developers, right? Which is such as the case for Kyocera and specifics, where there was a known, you know, vulnerability internally, but they weren't able to patch it fast enough in order to make that, you know, to mute the impact of having that vulnerability. And so, you know, a couple of years ago, I gave a talk around this that specifically it was called the basically the attack mirror. Right. So my software engineering team at the time was not able to keep up with the pace of a crowdsourced, you know, fully mature and weaponized team of people building malicious components for software exploitation. And this is the type of challenge that people are braced with today. Any type of customer of a software vendor is probably thinking about that. When we talk about the types of things that are also viable here, you're also talking about, you know, stolen SSL code signing attacks, you know, people adding stuff like to the VSA and the, you know, the root CA chain. You know, it's very hard for you to distinguish what is bad or malicious from what is, you know, truly intentional. And I think that's where, you know, to get back to the analogy Tom gave earlier, if you want to attack the institutions, this is how you attack the institutions. You attack the institutions of software development lifecycle, as well as the major political institutions.
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense. A lot of people, I think, in the industry assume things that are air quote standards like SAML are inherently secure, but there are ways to compromise these things. And I would imagine these attackers have, in my parlance, a backlog of targets that they've been shaping for some period of time. I wouldn't imagine that whoever did this is not thinking about the next 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, we just have to remember these attackers, specifically these attackers, majority of this group was aligned with intelligence services. And the goal of our Cold War adversaries is to colonize American cyberspace, period. And that's why the cyber criminals can run amok, creating a free fire zone to create a fog of war. But they have to provide access to the systems they compromise to their benefactors, or they cease to exist. And so this is just a real shift. I mean, the world has changed, okay? It's a brave new world, and you can't rely on the US government to defend you against this threat. You can't rely on local PD to defend you against this threat, which is why it's so important that you listen to the advice of people like Fred, and you rely on Fred if you're a customer to defend you. But more importantly, there are things you need to do on your end. I mean, Fred, I'd like to dig into that. Like, there's only so much you can do to protect your customer. You want to get into that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to be said there for sure. I think you made a very good point earlier that I think it makes sense to reverberate here again, and that is, an awful lot of this has to do with simple things like hygiene. And it's said in probably every single cybersecurity, webinar ever. But the truth is, hey, when the color of your Chrome browser has an update and it turns to red, that's too long, right? And when you don't have patches pushed into the operating system of the laptop that you're using, or the home desktop, or your mom's desktop, or whatever the case may be, including not limited to mobile devices, then all of these things become very prevalent and accessible targets. And there is a piece specifically around making sure that you have the ability to govern your internal network, and I think that's a big piece. There are a lot of open source tools that you can use and even deploy on commercial routers that you buy to be able to utilize that. And you can use and buy some of the technology in the same. OpenWRT is a great one for people to be able to operate here. But more and more, it's also paying attention to what's actually happening on your network, not just your devices, and understanding that there are implications when you don't. I think those are massive challenges that we can do very little work actually and make progress here. I get asked primarily by my mom or my parents' friends, or sort of the elder statesmen, hey, should I use antivirus? Is that relevant anymore? And obviously there are different controls that you can put in place here to prevent people from compromising or dropping malware on your devices, phishing, social media. A lot of the services that email provides now, especially for different types of authentication mechanisms, are all exploitable. So aside from putting in the de facto controls we expect, you also have the notion behind entitlements, and then the obvious things like, please turn on the Windows firewall. Please make sure that you are using the things given to you by the vendors producing the software to keep you safe.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.